Welcome to the Hawks Hunt Human Risk Management Podcast. On today's show, we will talk about whether or not we should be punishing employees in training. Is there a better way? Joining us is Nora Ahmed Moshe, Hawks Hunt's VP of Strategy and Operations. Nora has spoken on this exact topic many times around the world. How are you doing today, Nora?
I'm doing great, Elliot. How are you?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Can't wait.
Okay, so let's set the scene. A user fails a phishing test. Again. You don't want to punish them, but you also can't ignore it. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. Security teams are stuck between behavior change and blowback. And one of the most common questions is, what do we do with repeat offenders? In this episode, we're diving into what happens when traditional consequences stop working and why punitive approaches often backfire. We'll explore how leading organizations are shifting from punishment to progress and what it takes to build a program that changes behavior without alienating your people. All right, so with that scene being set, let's get into it. The real challenge that we are often hearing is about there being repeat failures without repercussions. So Nora, one of the most common things we hear from cyber leaders in the field is, what do we do with the people who keep failing? How would you answer that?
So I would ask a question first as to how did you try and get them to succeed in the first place? So, of course, if your approach to training them in the first place is not working, and some people may improve their behavior and some don't, you need to look at your whole approach and what you're doing there. What you want to do is you want to be able to change, obviously, what people know, you want to change what they do, and you want to change their attitude. And out of those, like changing somebody's attitude is really, really hard. And you're only going to get people to change their attitude if you really, really, truly get them on board with what you're doing. And that applies universally to everything, whether it's in work or even when you're dealing with children. So basically, if you want people to change what they're doing, you need to look at, are you encouraging them to want to do it? And that is the attitude change. So that's the first thing I would ask. Are you doing a program that is helping people change their behavior, learn things in a positive way? Or are you actually instilling fear in people? And maybe some people have become fearful already and they've changed their behavior because of that, and some people haven't. So you need to question your whole approach before you even delve into who those worst performers could be.
You've got to encourage the users. So with that in mind, why is punishing or reprimanding everyone, including repeat offenders, often a dead-end strategy?
The reason for that is that if someone encourages you to do something that you really want to do and you really believe in, you will most likely do it because you believe that to be the right thing. If you keep doing the wrong thing, is that for whatever reason you haven't internalized like the reasons to do to take the correct action. So we've learned from number of different behavioral science studies that if you want people to change their behavior, positive reinforcement always works better than punitive approaches. And when I say people, it also applies to animals. It applies to everybody. This has been extensively studied in rats, in school children, in prisoners, and in all of these various different studies, when you look at wanting to change somebody's behavior and you punish them when they take the incorrect action, or when you reward them when they take the correct action, universally, people, rats, they all change their behavior when you reward the positive action vis-a-vis punishing the negative action. It's as simple as that. We want people to think of behaving securely as something that they really want to do, they feel positive about, they know what to do. We can actually instill fear in people and get them to behave a certain way in a moment. But if we want to change that behavior over the long term, it is a universally proven fact that positive reinforcement works better than punitive approaches.
Have you seen any examples inside of organizations where that fear-based, that punitive approach has backfired, has actually made things worse? What does that look like when that happens?
Yeah, so I think you just need to talk to users and security leaders across different types of organizations to hear users' feedback, firstly, on what it feels like when, as let's say, as many programs unfortunately do, if you fail a phishing test, as a punishment, you need to endure training on that particular security topic. So rather than trying to take the hand of that person and guiding them in a positive fashion to learn something new and take a secure action and help them understand why they should take that action, punishing people and giving them unwanted consequences that they don't want to do. They don't want to take an hour of their day to do training on a topic that they think is boring, that they don't think applies to their lives. It creates a negative feeling. So they will have a negative attitude towards that training. And I've spoken to countless security leaders and users within my work context, but also in my personal life, because of course I love to talk about security related topics. I'm really fun at parties, as you can imagine, but people generally do feel like something boring and unnecessary is being forced upon them. So how on earth is that going to inspire someone to take that matter, take ownership of that topic? And we know that in any human-related risk, that's going to keep shifting shape and it's going to come at companies, and it's going to come at us from different angles, at unexpected times, take different shapes and forms in terms of how attacks are orchestrated against humans. It doesn't help to get them to take a correct action once at one particular point in time when they could be targeted at any time. So we really need to change those underlying attitudes. And so the sorts of things I've heard recently is, for example, with punitive approaches or just approaches that are deemed as boring by employers that don't engage them, is that people just don't take it. And I just spoke to a security leader just a couple of weeks ago who was despairing because they've spent a lot of time and money on a security awareness program, but people just don't take it. They just don't engage with it. And if you do penalize people for taking the wrong action, it raises the question, why would you even engage with it when you think in the worst case you're going to have to, as a punishment, just endure more training? So you're just not going to engage people. And there's another example that I'd like to share, which is on the extreme end, really. Unfortunately, there are still companies that punish people with extreme consequences for failing training. I spoke to a CISO of a hospital who basically was pretty down because he had to fire a nurse because she had failed 3 phishing simulations. So this nurse, whose job is basically to save people's lives on a daily basis, lost her job because of clicking 3 phishing simulations that the company had sent her to basically try and train her. But from the employee's perspective, what happens is that employees start to feel like security is out to get them. They're out to fire them. They are going to suffer terrible consequences, lose their job, lose their livelihood if they engage with these emails. So what would you do if somebody who sits next to you at work suddenly one day had to pack up their desk and leave, and you're like, why are you fired? Oh, because I failed these 3 phishing simulations. Oh, what happened? They came in through my email. I wouldn't touch my emails after that. I would be just like not clicking on anything. I would be missing important emails. So it creates the type of culture where people then become fearful around whoever has been seen to suffer the consequences of those punitive approaches. It's just culturally, it just creates a terrible negative culture and fear and disengagement around security, which doesn't just have an impact on security, it has a negative detrimental impact on productivity, because people will shy away from doing their work because they fear that they're going to be tricked into something that might get them fired again. So it's overall very negative.
Yeah, you go from trying to scare them straight to just scaring them off of even engaging. That's a really just a extreme and crazy example of actually being fired. And you can imagine how much people are going to want to report any kind of an incident to their cybersecurity team after that. It doesn't exactly build bridges towards other parts of the organization.
That's so true. And we know that unreported attacks are those that can do the most harm. And we know that people actually have the power to stop attacks even if they've already taken unwanted actions. So if you've clicked on something or you've given out your password already, what do you want as a security leader? What do you want your employees to do at that stage when they realize they've made a mistake? Do you want them to run and hide while the adversary is lurking in your systems? Or do you want them to quickly run to the security and say, I've made a mistake, please help? At which point the security can most likely still mitigate a lot of that risk and stop a lot of bad things from happening. But they can't do that if they don't know about it.
So I don't mean to keep on hammering home the questions about repeat offenders, the repeat clickers, but it is something that keeps on coming up in conversations with us at Hawks Hunt. And just talking about the idea of understanding your people, understanding their motivations, understanding why they behave the way that they do, in fostering a more positive and psychologically safe culture and safe environment for them to learn in. Let's just look at like what is going on with the repeat clickers mentally. What's going on psychologically? Is it just carelessness or is it something else?
That's a great question. And that is actually a question that the security team should be trying to get the answer to. So, first and foremost, going back to what I referred to in the beginning, is that you need to have a program in place where you know that you are training most of your people and you're seeing the results over time, just getting better and better. So you know that you've ascertained as a baseline that your approach is working. Because if you just sort of see very low engagement across the board and you see like little bit of improvement, but not the sort of improvement you should be seeing, and then you still have repeat clickers, you kind of don't really even know if you're doing the right thing or if you've just by chance managed to kind of get those few people to improve a little bit. So if you know that you are using the type of approach that should work and works for the majority of the people, then you should be able to reduce that number of repeat clickers to such a small subset that you can start digging into that data in more detail. And you may be able to apply extra positive training to that group. You would be able to somehow engage them with content that's applicable to them because you've been able to see more clearly what types of roles they could be in. Are they in a particular geographical location? So you sort of start to break it down. You start to understand them more as people and not a mass. So we deal with companies of all different sizes. We deal with a lot of really large companies. So if you have a subset of repeat clickers that you're training and you're seeing, some behavior change and you can whittle that group to a smaller subset, of course it starts to help you understand, who they are and why. I love the saying, seek first to understand and then to be understood, because when you're working with people, if you don't understand their motivations for doing or not doing something, you're kind of shooting in the dark as to, what could motivate them to change their behavior. So once you start to apply a really positive, engaging actions towards that group rather than punitive approaches, and you whittle it down further, you can get to a point where you can actually address a lot of those people individually. And now when you have less data and less people to deal with, you can perhaps in some cases find, when you really start to dig into who those people are, some insider threats. You might find some people who are actually doing it maliciously, but the vast majority of people don't act in malice. They act because they don't know the correct action, or they don't know alternatives, or they don't care about security, or they don't understand the implications of attacks. I've spoken to a customer just recently who was able to get their group of repeat clickers to such a small number that they were actually able to contact them all individually. And then once they are able to really positively again approach those people and start to understand, why are you doing this, then they can really get to the bottom of if the general approach that's even like it's working with the majority of the company is not working with those people. At least they understand why they do those things. It applies not just to clicking on phishing, but other potentially unsafe actions like USB sticks, or other things that go against company policies. So one of our customers had loads of people using USB sticks, and they actually targeted a positive engaging training towards those people, and then they got so many people to stop using those USB sticks that the people left with such a small number again that they could literally call them and be like, hey, why are you using a USB stick? And some of those people just still didn't know why it might be dangerous. They got the explanation, and then there were a few people that needed to use USB sticks, and you could explain to them how to do it safely, or get them another device, or whatever. The point is that when you're dealing with people, there's a myriad of different reasons like why people do things, and you can make all sorts of assumptions as to why, but the more you can sort of start to understand them on an individual level, why they're doing these things, the more you can actually find other solutions that are positive because we know positive actions with those people will get them to change their behavior, not the punitive actions.
Yeah, understanding them on the individual level is such an important point. It's amazing what can be revealed when you communicate with the actual, whether you call them your end user, your colleague, or just that person sitting next to you, if you can really figure out what's going on. One of my favorite stories was a CISO who I've spoken with several times in the past was at a Fortune 100 company, and they isolated a large amount of repeat clicking from one department. And from that department, they isolated that down further to one specific person. And they found this person. This was not a stupid person. It happened to be the sales department. This person was very bright, very high performing in their job. But this person went over to it and said, hey, what's going on? And this person's like, well, I'm actually really interested in what's going on with these cybersecurity threats. And so whenever I get a simulation, or whenever I get what I think is probably a scam, I just click on stuff to see what happens. And so you can imagine after the initial horror of that response wore off, he realized that this is actually a great opportunity to take someone and educate them and see what happens. And they created a sandbox environment for this person. This person clicked and clicked and clicked and became a tremendous champion of cybersecurity that the CISO could then use to communicate cybersecurity training and topics to the whole sales and marketing department. So there's really a lot that can come up positive from these situations if you just take that extra effort that you've been discussing very eloquently. And
it's an incredible story. I absolutely love that, because you think about, what if they used a punitive approach in that story? Worst come to worst, they actually fire the person. So what would have happened is that they would have become extremely bitter. They probably would have had even more negative approach to security. They would have probably behave unsecurely everywhere else they go. And instead, like you said, they were able to turn that person into like an ambassador. And that's what we need, is we need people on board. We need humans in the organization to be on board for the security culture to change across the board. So, that's, I think it's such a lovely story. As said, how could you ever, sitting in your security department's corner, ever have imagined that that was the reason why they were clicking.
Yeah, I love that story too. And it's a true story. And it goes to show you too how taking that extra effort to actually see what's making people tick can really reveal some important things. I mean, I know that when they categorize and define insider threats and insider risk, they put it in those three buckets, right? It's malicious, negligent, and whatever the term for socially engineered is, tricked or something. But within those larger categories, there's so many little possibilities that because we're human,
Yeah.
humans do not fit into nice three categories for everything. So I think that the broader lessons that you're communicating here really hold true for that. Now that being said, besides adding training, if you have someone who just keeps on failing, and they just fail and fail and fail, and it comes to a point where it's a bit of a danger. What do you do for those people who just keep on failing these simulations, or just keep on clicking?
So again, once you understand why it's happening, often you may have actually communicated to them in a way, even if you've tried to be positive, but you've actually tried to communicate with them in a way that doesn't connect with that person specifically. So again, everybody is different. So of course, we would want every employee in every company to understand fully how an attacker might get in and cause terrible damage to a company through accessing one employee's account, for example, who never thought that they would be a target. So people might not understand what the risk is to the company from their own kind of, through their role. They don't see themselves as being maybe, in the security sphere in any way. Some people will get motivated by understanding more about how their personal lives might be affected. Some people will be more impacted by understanding like what can happen when attacks take place. So I think we really need to individualize the approach for every person because, you know, we talked earlier about all the different behavioral science studies about how when we want people to change their behavior, we want to take a positive approach over a punitive approach because we know it's proven that positive approach will help them change their behavior. But let's say we want people to become healthier. So then we encourage everyone to be healthier and like we're like, yeah, like you will live longer and we'll tell them all sorts of things. But then we might not get some people moving because even though they've understood the reason. So then we need to go deeper into helping them understand, well, you could, in your case, well, you could improve your cardiovascular health, or you could be around longer for your grandkids, or you would be able to walk around that like beautiful area in your town that you can't really do the whole walk. So everyone will have a different motivation. And how do we tap in to that motivation? I do believe that every person, like nobody wants to be a victim of any crime. Nobody wants to be a victim of a cybercrime because it's horrendous. The consequences can be disastrous, obviously financially, but the consequences psychologically for employers through whom maybe a breach has started can be disastrous too. So I believe that aside from the very, very few intentionally malicious actors, whom of course we need to recognize if they're inside the companies, but they really are the vast, vast minority. So with most people, I believe that there will be some way that we can connect with them. We just maybe haven't found that way. So, like, we know, for example, that gamification works with people getting involved in wanting to stay in an approach that teaches them stuff and they keep improving their position in the game as they go. But what is the content that we're sort of approaching them with? Or what's the sort of shape that the training is is taking, what message resonates with each individual. Across the board in all communications, as I kind of gave health as an example, if we want that positive behavior to occur, we need to find a way to get through to all of those people. And it's not that easy. It isn't easy because everyone's different. And that's why it may be appealing for some security professionals to try and think of the punitive approach as the right one, because that is easier. It is easier to, fire people if you just look at it from the one angle of, will you have that person clicking anything ever again? Well, you won't have them clicking, but you also won't have them saving any lives. And now you have to recruit a new person who's going to be scared because they're going to find out what happened to the previous person. So it isn't that easy. And I think that's why humans are really complex, which makes humans really fun and interesting too. But there's no on-off button. That's why we have to try and find these different ways to connect with them. And one thing I will add to that is that the reputation that the security team is able to develop for themselves within the organization is are you like a friend or a foe to those kind of employees? So if you do also brand and manage to get the message through to the employees that the security team is on your side and is always there to help you, that already goes a long way to them actually listening to the messages that you put across. So it works both sides. Who's communicating and what are they communicating to the recipient so that it actually resonates with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when people get fired, I think probably the idea is that will be some kind of a deterrence from other people being careless. The idea is that if we just punish them enough, that'll freak out the rest of the company so they won't do this thing. But I wonder about that whole idea of deterrence. I mean, I think that's basically a war, like a military concept of showing strength, or it's a criminal justice concept of having such horrible punishments that people don't commit a certain crime. What do you think about that whole concept of deterrence? Is that something that people do potentially subscribe to, where it's oh, okay, well, now that I see there's actually a really big punishment that comes, then that means that this thing is really important that I do behave or don't behave in that way in order to avoid that punishment. And one of the examples I've heard several times is from the finance industry, where the CEO would even actually write an email, and anyone who failed more than whatever it was, 2 or 3 simulations, would get an email from the CEO. And this was I've actually seen this email before. It was from a while back, but it said, at, XYZ company, we only hire the best and the brightest because our customers and the markets depend on us. Unfortunately, you are obviously not that. You have failed. So they shame the person and they humiliate the person. And so you put that out there. And then on top of that, if you go to the next, in that same company, they would fire the employee if they failed even more. They would even fire the CISO if there was a breach on the CISO's watch. So it was this very just embedded in the DNA of the company, a very punitive approach. I don't know, maybe it worked okay for this company in some degree, but I'm seeing that that's not the way that people are going towards anymore, that they're seeing that is just not a really scalable, sustainable approach. But what do you think about that idea of deterrence through punishment, through fear?
So, when we're dealing with business employees within businesses, we're not in a war. We're trying to do stuff that's not to do with security or attacking or defending. We have to equip employees to defend the company against any attacks that can come at any moment in time. But the employees are not there to fight cybercrime primarily. They've signed up for a job that they know how to do, hopefully, or they're training to know how to do, and something that they feel like they are experts in, something that's within their domain of expertise. What you said about the email, I'm horrified. I'm horrified that somebody who's been hired to do one job could be told that they're not good at their job because they failed at something that they weren't trained to do properly, which is not part of their normal job. Like a security professional should never try and think about a general employee who's where security is not a part of their job description. You can't assume that they're going to know what they need to do. So that's like the first thing is like, you fire all of those people. Who's going to do the work to keep the business going and grow the business? Or in other organizations, we work with NGOs, all sorts of organizations that we work with, companies in critical infrastructure, so many different industries. And so we then start firing people when we've tried to hire the best people. And so then the productivity will go down, or the results will go down, or you can't serve your customers or your users or the beneficiaries of whatever your organization is delivering. So that is a really bad negative consequence that you've now brought upon yourself, because you've started firing all these people instead of actually helping them do the right thing. So I think that, obviously, like if you are doing something out of fear, like you will probably internalize more of a feeling where I don't want to get caught doing this, rather than I don't want to do this, right? So you just think, what is, again, what you want intrinsic motivation for people to do the right thing. And if the motivation is fear, then like what would you do if nobody would ever find out? And in a lot of cases, nobody will ever find out. Like, what if nobody ever finds out that you left the office door open, and an adversary just walks in? So you want that person to think, nobody can see me, but I still want to make sure the office door is shut because I care about the company and I don't want anyone to come in here who shouldn't be in here. So I think again, it's not just what I think, it's what I see around me, is what behavioral science studies have shown. It is, fear can make people do the right thing momentarily, but it's not going to change their attitude. We're essentially talking about changing people's attitudes and the culture in the company. And you can't force that on people. Like, you cannot say to someone, have a culture like this. Because culture is something that kind of evolves and is amplified by everything that you see around you. It's like a common set of behaviors, common set of attitudes, and, based on a common set of knowledge in a group of people. And so if you see people around you acting in a certain way, and they're positive and they talk to you about it positively, that is much more likely to change your attitude. I personally do believe that by punishing people, you may momentarily get people to not do something, but how are they gonna, is it gonna be habitual? We know that phishing, for example, the way it works is by exploiting our human emotions, like urgency and fear and greed and all of those things that we know that still, majority of phishing attacks, for example. And so when you're in that moment of the wrong message or the right message at the wrong time, right message at the wrong time, depends whose perspective you're looking at it from. Like, it can happen to anyone. It can happen to anyone who's trained, who's got the right attitude, but by using making an example of somebody, you will probably have people living in so much fear for a short amount of time that they won't do anything. They're not going to do their jobs properly. They're not going to open emails. They're not going to click on legitimate emails. And then after a while, when they haven't internalized that change, it's really it's not going to work. I think it's safe to say I personally don't believe in that.
So do the right thing. Try to get a positive, reward-based situation for people to actually be motivated to do the right thing. I think that we're about a half hour into the show today, so I think now it's about time to shift gears into how to get people to do the right thing. So what does that look like? What does a positive, a non-punitive behavior-focused approach to security training look like?
So, firstly, I think it should be fun because people, as we've said a few times during this talk, people people aren't going to come to work generally and think of security as an interesting topic. They think it's generally quite boring, technical, not my problem. So, why would you, when you're busy and you have a job to do, because you are paid to do a different job, why would you become interested and engaged in a topic if it's presented to you in a boring way? So I think that's the first thing, is that there is so much boring training out there. Who of us has not sat through some incredibly boring corporate training course and click through the training to just get through it and get the credit or whatever and show click they've done it, but not learned anything because it was boring. So I believe that, like, you want to engage people in something they may not have a naturally keen interest in. Make it fun, like make it engaging, make it look nice, like respect the people's time that you're going to serve them something engaging. The second thing I think we already touched on is using a gamified approach. It is incredible how adults and children alike learn through gamification, because we have that streak in us as humans where we like a little bit of nice healthy competition, and we like to win, and we don't like to just win against other people, but we just like to win more things, even if the things are not tangible. So I think gamification is just such a beautiful thing, because again, when you're busy and you're doing your work, whatever that may be, would you rather take a break to play a game, or would you rather take a break to read a really boring document about something? And then when you're rewarded positively, in gamification, when you get whatever the reward is, whenever you progress in a game, it is literally a rewarding feeling, and people want to come back for that feeling, and they start to internalize the message.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. We've seen teams ask whether HR should be involved with repeat failures. Where do you think the line is? And what are the risks of escalating to HR? Too quickly or at all, for that matter.
I love this question because why should HR not be involved in people matters and training people? I think if you're thinking about HR as the punishing body of your organization, I think you have a problem on your hands in terms of the entire security culture of the organization. Because one concept that underpins really all of the stuff that we've spoken about today is the concept of psychological safety. And the thing about psychological safety is that when people feel psychologically safe in an environment, they're not fearful of making mistakes or having their honest mistakes come to light and then them being punished for it. And I think in light of all the things that we've discussed today, I think it's so obvious that when you have psychological safety in an organization, people don't feel like the organization is trying to trick them, but they also feel like if they do, for example, give out their password, they can go to the security team, they can admit to their honest mistake without fear of any punishment. And when you have psychological safety, you will have a better security culture. And psychological safety is also something that has been studied extensively, for example, at Google, where they looked at which teams are the best functioning. And the results were that the best functioning teams are those that have the highest level of psychological safety, because they're able to bring any issues to the fore, discuss them openly, look for solutions together. These are all of the things that we need in a good security culture. Now, when we think about HR, It's part of the same organization as the security team and the employees. And I believe that HR should be cultivating and fostering psychological safety in an organization. And they're in a great place to do that. And therefore, I think that HR should be involved in making security a positive thing and helping the humans in the organization understand why it's important for them to behave securely, how they can learn to behave securely, how the organization helps them behave securely. So I think that if somebody was asking, should HR be involved in terms of punishing people, I think my views are very clear. HR should not be punishing people who make honest mistakes in security training ever, because those punitive approaches never work. I think HR should be a part of creating a positive company culture. And if the cornerstone of a positive company culture is psychological safety, by getting in, HR involved in all of that, it just helps create that psychological safety across the board within the organization. I think if you really have, for example, issues talking to people, if you don't have that level of familiarity in the company, or you don't know how to talk to people, or communication is not your security team's forte, maybe HR can help you with that. Maybe they can help you connect with those people. But should HR be punishing people who fail security training? I don't think so.
Yeah. The topic of HR and cybersecurity is so interesting to me personally too, because I think that if you really look at it, cybersecurity is at the intersection of IT and HR. It's about people, and I think that's what we're talking about here. This whole idea about punishment versus positive reward in training is all about the fact that cybersecurity always comes down to people, and who is better suited to communicate to people, to understand people, to have processes around developing and helping people, or giving a nudge when they need a little bit of extra help, and that's your HR team. And one of our European customers, there are about 1,000 people. Their cybersecurity awareness training program is actually co-run by the head of HR and the head of IT security, and they have unbelievable results. They're somewhere upwards of close to 100% participation. So there's something to really be said for that. And I appreciate the way you kind of turn that question on its head to look at using HR to just create a more psychologically safe environment, as opposed to using HR as kind of the hall monitors, the security guards. Because anyone who's ever watched the old TV show The Office knows how people have typically looked at HR as kind of the police officers, the really annoying hallway monitors. And I think cybersecurity leaders understand that feeling as well, is that you're not exactly the most popular guys at the party all the time, but you can be. And it's amazing what can happen when you actually use this whole cybersecurity training program as a tool for positivity, as a tool for communication, as opposed to as a stick to punish people. Mm-hmm. So I do appreciate that answer. Let's wrap things up here on this idea of leniency. And this is something that I have had this conversation many times, actually, at conferences, at cybersecurity dinners. And some people are just simply afraid to go to a positive environment type of training because they're afraid of the optics of leniency. They think that people who have done bad should be punished. They think that their management thinks that people who have done should be punished. So what do you say to that, where people are afraid of giving off an overly lenient vibe, overly lenient optics across the organization by having a positive approach to security where they don't punish people for mistakes?
So, two things I would say. One is coming back to, do you really want people to internalize secure behaviors and attitudes, or do you want them to behave securely when they think you're watching? And I think that everybody wants people to really change their attitudes. And again, I think if you are leading with fear, and again, this is pretty universal, it doesn't just apply to security, but if you lead by fear as a leader, you can get people to execute the things that you want, but you're not going to instill this intrinsic drive to do the right thing in them. And that applies to security. The other thing is, If you're a security leader or a security team member, we know that's a really, really stressful job. And we know that people worry for their own job security. They worry about the stress levels. They worry about being blamed, when things go wrong, because so often security teams only get, don't get any credit. They only get spoken to when things go wrong. So they only tend to get negative attention on themselves, because if things run smoothly, oftentimes, which shouldn't be the case, security teams may be invisible within the organization. So I think if the security leader or team member feels insecure, if they don't feel that they have this clear authority in the company, I think it's like, I want to understand why that person feels that way. And it is often because they don't feel like confident that their job is like they're being respected and they have job security and they're going to keep their jobs. So what I would advise those people to do is take a step back from that controlling approach and think about the results that they're getting with the training that they're doing. So look at over time if you can pull away from that attitude of I should be seen as an authority, and that will happen when people know that they'll get my stick if they don't comply. They will, if you can really find a way to step away from that for a while and do a training program that is engaging, that's cultivating psychological safety, that's meeting people where they're at, so it's individual and interesting to each person. Take a step back for a minute and look at the results of what you will get from that and compare that to your previous stick approach and see what happens.
Yes, absolutely. Numbers speak so loudly in this situation. And we have to bring up at this point one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard in cybersecurity training before, and that was with Qualcomm. And they had a group of employees. It was their, whatever you want to call them, it's kind of like the dirty dozen, except for it was their 1,000 worst repeat offenders. And they clicked on everything. And they had failure rates of well beyond 50%. Some of them had clicked on 3 to 5 to 10 simulations in a row. They were considered kind of beyond redemption. And what they did was nothing was working to get through to these people. So they tried a positive behavior-based approach. It happened to be with Hawks Hunt, so spoiler alert, but they went for this approach where they actually were giving them a little bit of extra training and just giving them training that was positive, that was rewarding, that showed them that if they do the right thing, that there would be a positive outcome from that. Those people within 3 months went from being by far the worst performers in the company. Their results were compared with Hawks Hunt against the rest of the company who stayed on a traditional punitive-based program with a traditional legacy security awareness training tool. And the behavior-based positive test group, the Dirty 1000, they had something like twice as good failure rates. They had something like 3 times the phishing simulation reporting rates as the rest of the population. So those results speak for themselves. So if you're worried about your optics, if you create a program where you can actually track the results and you can test them and you can show those to your company, then I would invite you to do that, because that's what is ultimately going to win the argument is the numbers. Here you go. This is just how it is. And if anybody wants to see that case study, you can either just Google Hawks Hunt Qualcomm, it'll pop up. All right. Well, Nora, I think that's a pretty good place to leave off here. I'm sure there are many things that many people would like to learn about how to get started with this kind of a program. If you have kind of a final summary thought for people who are thinking about changing from a punitive to a positive program, maybe you could share that with everybody as we say sayonara to our audience.
I would say believe in people and treat them as individuals. Read up on psychological safety. And as a security team member, try and step outside of your role and think about what it would be like for you if it's a topic that's not something that's naturally interesting to you at all. How would you like to be taught about that topic? Would you like to be in an engaging, interesting, individualized, gamified environment? Or would you like to be punished? And would you like to read loads of boring documents? And I think that's already something that will, maybe inspire a little bit of change in some people.
Appreciate the final sentiments there, Nora. Okay, and with that, the Hawks Hunt Human Risk Management podcast episode on positive versus punitive training comes to an end. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Thank you, Nora, so much for sharing all of your expertise here for this episode, and we will, I'm sure, see you again here on the show.
Definitely. It's been a pleasure.